The type of stress that I faced every day going out on patrol, I visualized the attack so that I could respond quickly in case there was some sort of danger, and it put myself in a particular mental state, the fight or flight type of state. And practicing that every day for a year, I found that coming back to the U.S. where there was little to no threat, it took very little stimuli to put me back in that frame of mind. I'm not sure about the physiological conditions you discussed, if I experienced those. Based on my experience, I felt a lot of anxiety and fear in some cases when I couldn't control my personal space because I had been attacked many times. I think it does something to your subconscious or whatever, that you recognize that threat is real. Even when you go through training, as I had, my conscious mind didn't want to believe there was a real threat the first time I encountered one. My subconscious recognized it, but my conscious mind was in denial, and that caused a problem. But then once I made it through that, it created a neural pathway or something that convinced my brain that there is really threats. And ever since that time, I think I've been different. The first time I didn't react quickly, but every time thereafter, I can see a threat and then I react quickly as I've been trained to do. But I think with that comes a cost, and that cost for me was constant uneasiness about my environment and looking for threats in places that aren't appropriate that are relatively safe. So I'm not exactly sure. I've often wondered about that question about a person's stress level. I can think of one anecdotal example where a guy I knew had tons of combat experience, and yet the littlest thing, the littlest source of stress would set him into a tailspin. And based on that particular example, I often thought that stress was cumulative, and that if you encounter enough of it over your life, then your capacity to deal with stress is reduced. And that seems contrary to, it might be contrary to some theories out there. Maybe some people develop tools to deal with stress, and they get so used to dealing with certain types of stress that their capacities are larger. I'm not exactly sure. I think in my case, combat stress, for example, once you experience it, you know what to expect. I've even dealt with this in protective capacities, going through riots and other civil unrest, where I know what the stages are that you have to go through in order to really face a threat. A lot of my passengers, other diplomats and stuff, would be freaking out when they saw these big angry crowds of people, but I was cool as a cucumber because I recognize, we haven't reached the final stages, and those are like, you got this angry mob, and then they're beating on the car, showing intent to get you, but they haven't gotten you yet. And if they gain access to the vehicle, that's another level. But as long as I have ammunition, we're still fine. But then when I run out of ammunition and there's no place to escape, then that's a stressful situation. So most people can't see those steps far enough in advance and have confidence that you can deal with them up to a point. So they freak out really early on. And my combat experience was something similar. You're worried about the worst possible outcome, but then when you've been in combat, you recognize that gunfire in itself isn't bad. It's hard to shoot someone, and you really don't react to the rounds until you hear them, like the crack of the round go by. Then you recognize that's accurate fire. So you take cover, stuff like that. But eventually you realize you got all this protective equipment, so you might get shot, but if you do, that's not the end of the world. You got the body armor covering up the important stuff, and then if you get shot in the leg or the arm, you've got medical training. Like, I'm really confident in my trauma treatment skills now. You apply a tourniquet, pack a wound with gauze to get it to stop bleeding. If you could stop the bleeding, you'll be fine. You'll get to medical care and you'll survive. But you need to return fire and deal with the threat. So with that level of confidence that I have now, I can be in a situation like that and not succumb to the physiological responses that I did early on, and that is your the fog of war, they call it, where you lose fine motor skills, you lose some situational awareness, a state of confusion. I've experienced those when an explosion went off one time, but now, I mean, you get used to that environment, and I don't know, you realize that something that seems bad based on initial impressions, like, you can see through your personal experience they're not bad yet. So that's all I can think to say on that topic.